The autumn rain fell like bullets on the streets of the city, and Dante Moretti watched it from behind bulletproof glass. His penthouse office sat atop the tallest building in the financial district, a tower of steel and secrets that bore his family's name in letters taller than a man. At 34, Dante had inherited more than wealth. He had inherited fear itself. His reflection in the window showed a man who rarely smiled. Sharp jaw, darker eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched, and shoulders that carried the weight of an empire built on blood and loyalty. The tailored black suit he wore cost more than most people earned in a year. But Dante would have traded it all for one thing he could never buy: a way out. "The advisor's warning they're getting restless," said Vincent. His second-in-command, a barrel-chested man with silver streaks in his dark hair. He stood near the mahogany desk, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier. "The families are questioning your commitment. They say a man without a wife is a man without roots." Dante didn't turn from the window. "I don't need roots. I need results." "With respect, boss, you need legitimacy. Your father, your grandfather, they all had wives beside them at the table. It's tradition, structure." Vincent paused, choosing his next words carefully. It's armor against those who would see weakness. The word weakness hung in the air like smoke. Dante's parents had died 6 months ago in a car accident that was no accident at all. Since then, rival families had been circling like sharks, testing his defenses, probing for soft spots. "So, what do you suggest?" Dante asked, his voice cold as the rain outside. "Should I take out an advertisement? Interview candidates?" Vincent cleared his throat. "There's another way. The old way. A selection process that shows your power, that reminds this city who makes the rules." And that was how the lottery was born. The artist's sanctuary, Rossi's hands, were covered in paint when the men arrived. She had been working on restoring a 17th-century portrait, carefully bringing color back to faded cheeks, when the knock came at her studio door. The small space above the gallery where she worked was cluttered with canvases, jars of brushes, and the comfortable chaos of creation. She opened the door to find 2 men in expensive suits, their faces blank as mannequins. "Miss Nina Rossi?" the taller one asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes." He handed her an envelope, thick and cream-colored, sealed with red wax. "You are required to read this immediately and comply with its contents. No exceptions." Before she could respond, they were gone, their footsteps echoing down the narrow staircase. Nina stood in her doorway, the envelope feeling heavy as stone in her paint-stained hands. She closed the door, sat down on her worn couch, and broke the seal. The words swam before her eyes. Decree. Unmarried women, ages 22 to 30, mandatory registration, lottery wife. The paper slipped from her fingers. The night of drawing, the ballroom of the Grand Imperial Hotel blazed with chandeliers that cast everything in harsh, glittering light. Nina stood among 300 other women, all wearing their finest dresses, all trying not to show their terror. Some had come willingly, seduced by the promise of wealth and power. Others, like Nina, had come because refusing meant putting their families at risk. She wore a simple black dress, the only formal thing she owned, and had pulled her long brown hair into a neat bun. She refused to dress up like a doll in a shop window. Round her, women whispered and wept. Some fainted. Others stared straight, ahead with glassy eyes, already gone to some faraway place in their minds. At the front of the ballroom, on a raised platform draped in burgundy velvet, stood a golden cage filled with folded papers.
Wow.
Each paper bore a name. Each name was a life. The crowd fell silent as Dante Moretti entered from a side door. He wore all black, from his shoes to his shirt, and moved like a shadow-given form. He didn't look at the women. He barely looked at anything. His face was a mask of elegant indifference. Vincent stood beside the cage, his hand resting on its ornate bars. When Dante gave a slight nod, Vincent opened the door and reached inside. His hands stirred the papers, mixing them like a deck of cards. Then he pulled one out. The room forgot how to breathe. Vincent unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the name. He looked at Dante, who gave another small nod. Then Vincent's voice boomed across the silent room. "Nina Rossi, First defiance. Nina felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Around her, women stepped back, creating a circle of space, as if she carried a contagious disease. She could feel their relief, their pity, their barely concealed gratitude that it wasn't them. Security guards in dark suits moved through the crowd toward her. But before they could reach her, Nina began walking on her own. She kept her head high, her steps steady. Even as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, she climbed the steps to the platform. Dante finally looked at her, his dark eyes scanning her face with the intensity of someone reading a document. She met his gaze without flinching. "Congratulations," Vincent said, the word hollow and meaningless. Nina turned to Dante, ignoring everyone else in the room. When she spoke, her voice carried in the silence. "I'm not a prize in a carnival game. I'm a human being with my own life and my own dreams." She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "This is wrong, and you know it." The room erupted in gasps. Vincent's hand moved toward his jacket, but Dante raised one hand, stopping him. For the first time all evening, something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or was it respect? "Take her to the car," he said quietly, "and treat her with courtesy." As Nina was led away, she didn't know whether to feel victorious or terrified. She had spoken truth to power, but power had not released its grip. If anything, she felt its fingers tighten around her future like a fist around a flower, ready to crush or preserve her at its whim. The rain continued to fall as the black car pulled away from the hotel, carrying Nina toward a life she never chose, in a mansion she never wanted. Beside a man she already knew she would never stop fighting. The gilded prison morning light filtered through silk curtains as Nina woke in a bed larger than her entire studio had been. The room around her looked like something from a museum. Antique furniture polished to a mirror shine. Walls covered in damask fabric, the color of champagne, and a chandelier that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. She hated every inch of it. For 3 days, she had barely seen Dante. He had disappeared each morning before dawn and returned late at night. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the only evidence he existed at all. Meanwhile, Nina was surrounded by servants who anticipated her every need before she could voice it. Bodyguards who followed her from room to room, and rules that felt like invisible chains. Don't go to the East Wing. Don't answer the phone. Don't open the door to strangers. Don't. On the 4th morning, Nina decided she was done being obedient. She found the library by accident. While exploring the mansion's endless corridors, it was a circular room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that spiraled up to stories, connected by a rottering staircase that twisted like a ribbon. Weak sunlight filtered through a stained glass dome in the ceiling, painting the floor in patches of colored light. It was the first room in this enormous house that felt like it had a soul. Nina ran her fingers along the spines of books, classics in Italian, French and English philosophy texts, poetry collections, and surprisingly, several books on art history. She pulled out a volume on Renaissance painters and tend, settled into a leather armchair that had been worn soft by years of use. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't hear him. "Enter the man behind the mask. That's my favorite chair," Dante said from the doorway. Nina jumped, nearly dropping the book. Dante stood in the entrance wearing dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking more human than she had ever seen him. Without the armor of his suit jacket, she could see he was leaner than she expected, his forearms marked with scars that told stories he would never share. "I didn't know you read," Nina said, recovering her composure. "I thought men like you only read contracts and death warrants." Something that might have been amusement flashed in his eyes. "Men like me? Rich, powerful, used to getting everything you want." She closed the book, but didn't move from the chair. "This is a beautiful library. It deserves to be used." Dante walked to the window, his back to her. "My mother collected these books. She believed that power without knowledge was just violence and expensive clothing." His voice softened. "She died believing I would be different from my father. I'm not sure I proved her right." The confession hung between them, unexpected and raw. Nina studied his profile against the stained glass. The way colored light fell across his face like bruises. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "The lottery. You could have just chosen someone willing. There are plenty of women who would marry you for your money." "That's exactly why," Dante said. He turned to face her. "Everyone in my life wants something from me. They see the power, the empire, the name. I wanted someone who wanted nothing to do with any of it. Someone who would be honest, because she had no reason to lie. So I'm an experiment." Nina stood, anger flaring in her chest. "You stole my life to prove a philosophical point?" "I stole your life because I'm a selfish man who was tired of being alone," Dante said, and the honesty in his voice stopped her cold. "And because Vincent was right, without a wife, I look weak. And in my world, weakness is death." The breaking point that afternoon, everything changed. Nina was in the garden. The only place she was allowed to go without an escort, when she heard the commotion. Shouting from inside the house, then gunfire, sharp cracks that sent birds screaming from the trees. She froze, her heart in her throat. A bodyguard she recognized, a young man named Thomas, burst through the garden door. "Get down!" he shouted, running toward her. Nina dropped to her knees behind a stone fountain. Thomas reached her, just as a man in a dark mask appeared in the doorway, raising a gun. Thomas put himself between Nina and the shooter, his own weapon drawn. The shot, when it came, was deafening. Thomas fell backward, blood blooming across his shoulder. Nina screamed. Then Dante was there, appearing like a storm, his gun firing twice. The masked man dropped. Everything went silent except for Thomas's ragged breathing. Dante knelt beside his injured guard, his hands steady as he applied pressure to the wound. "Stay with me," he ordered. "Vincent." "Get the doctor." Nina found herself moving without thinking, pulling off her cardigan to help stanch the bleeding. Her hands shook but held firm. Dante's eyes met hers across Thomas's body, and something passed between them in that moment of shared crisis. "You didn't run," he said quietly. "He took a bullet meant for me," Nina replied. "I'm not going to abandon him." The truth in darkness that night, after Thomas had been rushed to the hospital and the mansion had been secured, Nina found Dante in the library again. He sat in the darkness, not reading, just staring at nothing. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. "Yes." "The bullet missed anything vital." Dante's voice was hoarse. "He has a wife, a baby daughter, 6 months old. He could have died today because of me. Because of what I am?" Nina walked closer, her earlier anger replaced by something more complicated. "What you are is a man who jumped in front of danger to save someone else. I saw you today, Dante, not the Mafia boss. Just you." He looked up at her, and in the moonlight through the stained glass, she saw something crumbling in his expression. The walls he kept so carefully maintained were full of cracks. "You should hate me," he said. "I do," Nina replied, but her voice was soft. "And I don't. Both things are true." She sat down on the arm of his chair, close enough to feel the warmth of him, far enough to keep her own walls intact. They sat like that in the darkness. Two people trapped by circumstances, connected by unwilling understanding. "Tell me about your art," Dante said finally. "What were you working on when they came for you?" And Nina, surprising herself, began to talk. About restoration, about bringing forgotten beauty back to life, about the meditation of matching colors, and the satisfaction of healing something broken. Dante listened without interrupting, and for the first time since the lottery, Nina felt like a person again instead of a possession. When she finally stopped talking, dawn was breaking through the stained glass dome. "I'm not going to pretend this is okay," Nina said, standing. "What you did is still wrong. But I think I'm starting to understand why you're so lonely in a house full of people." She left him there in the growing light, and Dante sat in his favorite chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, the smallest seed of hope that perhaps he wasn't beyond redemption after all. The storm gathers 2 weeks after the attack. Vincent came to Dante's office with news that made the air feel heavy as lead. "The Rossi family is making their move," he said, spreading photographs across the desk. "They've allied with the Benedettis and the smaller families on the north side. They're planning something big." Dante studied the surveillance photos. Men meeting in warehouses, money changing hands, weapons being moved. The Rossi family, no relation to Nina, just a cruel coincidence, had been his father's enemies, and now they were his. They had tried to kill him during the garden attack. They had failed, but they wouldn't stop. "How long do we have?" Dante asked. "Maybe less." Vincent's expression was grim. "Boss, they know about her. About Nina. They'll use her to get to you."
Dante's hand clenched into a fist on the desk.
Of course they would. She was his only visible weakness, the one thing everyone could see he cared about. Even if he hadn't fully admitted it to himself, the offer of freedom Nina was painting in a small studio Dante had set up for her in the mansion's sunroom. She had started a new piece. Working from memory, a self-portrait of the woman she used to be, surrounded by flowers. Before her life had been turned into someone else's story, she didn't hear him enter, lost in the rhythm of brush against canvas. "You're talented," Dante said softly. Nina jumped, a streak of blue crossing her work. She spun around, frustration on her face, but it died when she saw his expression. He looked tired, older somehow, as if years had caught up to him in a single night. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down her brush. Dante walked to the windows overlooking the garden where Thomas had nearly died. "There's going to be a war. My war, not yours. But you'll be caught in it if you stay." Nina's stomach tightened. "What are you saying?" He turned to face her, and she saw the decision written in the set of his shoulders. "I'm saying you're free. I'll have Vincent take you wherever you want to go. New city, new country, new identity if you need it. Enough money to start over. You can have your life back." The words should have filled her with joy. This was everything she had wanted since the night her name was drawn. Freedom, escape, the chance to return to who she had been. Instead, she felt something crack inside her chest. "Just like that?" she asked. "You're letting me go? I never should have taken you in the first place." Dante's voice was rough. "You were right that first night. This was wrong. I was wrong. And I won't let you die because of my mistakes." The weight of truth. Nina sat down on the window seat, her mind spinning. Over the past weeks, something had shifted between them. The late-night conversations in the library had become routine. She had learned that Dante spoke 3 languages, that he played piano when he thought no one could hear, that he visited Thomas and his family at the hospital every day. She had learned that he hated the violence of his world but felt trapped by legacy and loyalty, and he had learned about her childhood as an orphan raised by nuns, her scholarship to art school, her dream of opening her own restoration studio. He had listened to her dreams as if they mattered, as if she mattered. "What if I don't want to go?" she said quietly. Dante's head snapped toward her. "What?" Nina stood, walking toward him with her arms crossed. "I said, what if I don't want to go? What if I've started to care about the man who sits in the library at 3 in the morning reading poetry because he can't sleep? What if I want to stay and fight beside you instead of running away?" "Nina, you don't understand what you're saying. These men, they won't hesitate to hurt you, to kill you. I understand perfectly," she said, stopping in front of him. "I understand that you gave me a choice when you didn't have to. I understand that you're trying to protect me even though it means being alone again. And I understand that somewhere between hating you and knowing you, I started to care about what happens to you." The moment of choice, Dante reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the violence those hands were capable of. "If you stay, I can't promise you safety. I can't promise you a normal life. I can only promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of this choice." Nina leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his palms against her cheeks. "I don't want normal. Normal is boring. I want truth. Can you promise me that?" "Yes," he breathed. "Always." The kiss, when it came, was soft and desperate, and tasted like promises neither of them knew if they could keep. When they broke apart, Nina rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the rapid beat of his heart. "So what do we do now?" she asked, Dante said, his arms wrapping around her, holding her like she was precious and breakable and strong all at once. we fight together. The new beginning, the war with the Rossi family, was brutal but brief. With Nina's surprising strategic mind years of studying composition and balance in art, translated well to planning defenses and Dante's resources, they outmaneuvered their enemies at every turn. Nina had insisted on being involved, on understanding the full scope of Dante's world. She wouldn't be a delicate flower kept in a protected garden. She would be a partner. 3 months later, Nina stood in the library, hanging her finished self-portrait on the wall. But she had changed it. The woman in the painting was still surrounded by flowers, but now there were thorns too, and shadows, and in the background, barely visible, the silhouette of a man standing guard. Dante found her there as she knew he would. This was their room now, their sanctuary. "It's beautiful," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "It's honest," Nina corrected. "I'm not the same person who was pulled from that lottery, but I don't think that's a bad thing." Dante turned her in his arms, looking down at her with an expression that still surprised her with its tenderness. "I love you," he said. "I don't think I've ever said that to anyone who wasn't related to me by blood." "I love you too," Nina replied, and it was true. Complicated and strange and born from the worst circumstances, but true nonetheless. Even though you're a stubborn, overprotective, occasionally terrifying mafia boss. "Occasionally?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "Don't push your luck," she laughed, as twilight painted the stained glass in deeper colors. They stood together in the library, two people who had been forced together by fate, but who had chosen to stay by love. The empire of shadows still existed beyond these walls. But here, in this room filled with books and art and truth, they had created something else entirely, a home, and for a man who had spent his life ruling a kingdom of fear. Dante had finally found something more valuable than power. He had found someone who saw all of him, the darkness and the light, and had chosen to stay anyway. Nina looked up at him, a smile playing on her lips. "So, Dante Moretti, what do we do now?" He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "Now," he said, "we live." And they did.